Hi, this is Mark Goldberg with the UN Affairs blog UN Dispatch, and I'm chatting today with Mark Vlasic, and we're going to talk a bit about the sort of dreary subject of war crimes and war crimes prosecutions, a subject that, Mark, you're sort of uniquely qualified to speak on. Mark was formerly a prosecuting attorney at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which is the forum that tried Milosevic, and Mark's also been involved in the Srebrenica case and the Milosevic case. More recently, Mark was working in the higher reaches of the Pentagon as a White House fellow with both Rumsfeld and Bob Gates. And now, Mark, you're currently, correct me if I'm wrong, a senior fellow at the Georgetown Institute for International Law and Politics.
That's right.
Did I miss anything?
I think you got it all.
I got it all. I should also, say for the record that you you were an advisor to the Iraqi Special Tribunal that tried Saddam Hussein as well. Is that right?
Well, I was one of the lawyers that helped train the judges at the trial level.
Yes.
So I wouldn't go so far as to say I was an advisor.
But so nonetheless, I'd say you're uniquely qualified to talk about what we're going to chat about today. In fact,
I'll do my best.
Our conversation is sort of well timed because this week on Monday, January 7th, the former Liberian president Charles Taylor was formally brought to trial in The Hague. Now, the forum bringing Taylor to trial is the Special Court for Sierra Leone, which is a UN body, but he's being tried at the facilities of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. It was sort of an arrangement they made because they thought maybe security in Freetown, Sierra Leone might not be tight enough to support the trial of a former head of state. Now, Charles Taylor is being accused of sponsoring these terrible militias that rampaged the countryside of Sierra Leone for years in the 1990s. It was a terribly brutal civil war there that left hundreds dead or thousands dead and mutilated, and sort of gave rise to the blood diamond trade. And now he's sort of sitting in the dock in The Hague. And Mark, I'm wondering, sort of from your experience, you worked on the trial of Milosevic. Sort of how does one actually sort of bring a head of state to trial like this? What's a prosecution strategy?
Sure, I can say it's of course enormously complex to bring a case against a political leader, particularly a head of state. The challenge in these cases is a lot of the atrocities are committed on the ground, far, far away from the political leader who is helping orchestrate such crimes, and trying to find the linkages between the crimes on the ground and the political leader are usually very challenging. Political leaders like Charles Taylor are usually reluctant to sign written orders saying, kill them all, hack off limbs, do these terrible atrocities. And so the challenge for the prosecutor is putting together the crime-based witnesses and then tying those witnesses to insiders in the political organization, the military organization, and usually the security apparatus to help make those linkages so they can prove that the political leader was in fact the ones pushing the crimes within that country.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to do that, do you have to find people to flip? Do you have to find people who are, do you give like plea bargains? How does it work? I guess physically, how do you establish that linkage? You have people on, you have civilians who are being massacred on the countryside, then you have the leader somewhere far away. How do you sort of establish that link?
It can be done through a number of different ways. One of them, as you mentioned, is trying to find insiders, people who worked within the apparatus who can testify to the fact that they received orders from their superiors within the political organization. And can demonstrate that the senior leader knew what was going on, failed to do anything to stop it, failed to punish those people, or in fact was the one pushing the crimes in the first place.
I guess so. When you were working on the Milosevic trial, presumably you had sort of a similar problem. You sort of learned, so people can learn from those strategies. What were there sort of any specific instances you can speak to as saying, oh, this was this kind of exemplifies the kind of linkages that we need to make? So is there anyone that you recall ever flipping as a witness or sort of rattling on their superior? Do you just kind of move up the chain of command?
Sure. In the Milosevic case, there are a couple of people that kind of testified at that level. Clearly, they had Milosevic had some other senior officials in the Bosnian Serb Republic of Srpska that testified against him. Also, for instance, one of the witnesses I worked on was a former Serbian spy who talked about his apparatus and how he was working on behalf of the Belgrade government in Bosnia. Because one of the things we were trying to prove is the linkage between Milosevic and Serbia to crimes committed in Bosnia. And so witnesses like that are incredibly important because it helped paint the picture for the judges so they understand what the linkages were, how things actually worked within a country that may be separate from where the political leader is residing, where he has official power, and how the actions and crimes may have actually taken place.
Yeah. I guess I guess something interesting to me, at least, is the location of the trial of Charles Taylor. The crimes committed were committed in Sierra Leone. He is Liberian, but yet he's being tried in The Hague and in the facilities of the International Criminal Court. And I guess what strikes me is that the United States is among the sort of strongest supporters of what's called the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Currently, one of their first heads, chief prosecutor, was this man David Crane, who I'm sure you know, who's currently a law professor, I believe at Syracuse. I could be wrong, but he's an American Department of Defense official who really sort of built the case against Taylor, and in a sort of a dramatic moment, unsealed the indictments, and sort of got international pressure to secure his detention. And now, so now this sort of U.S. sponsored court, in a way, is using the facilities of the International Criminal Court, which is a body the United States is not a part of and has been sort of very hostile to, at least to varying degrees. And I'm curious to know, I guess, from your experience working sort of with least access to and working in high levels at the Pentagon, sort of what and from being a prosecutor and knowing the ins and outs of international law and how these prosecutions occur. So what's your perspective? What was your take on how the sort of officials of the Pentagon sort of related to the International Criminal Court? Was there still this high degree of hostility that we're led to believe exists?
The short answer is I don't think there is. To start off, though, I'd say David Crane did an outstanding job putting together that case and actually pushing to get Charles Taylor arrested. So that's a huge, huge victory for international law and kind of justice in itself. And I would note, just on that point, that we've seen an incredible change just in the short period of time, frankly, I've been a lawyer, where past dictators who committed these terrible crimes, frankly, in the past, nothing happened to them. Usually they skipped town to another country, lived in some beautiful villa, and lived happily ever after. And with the arrest of Slobodan Milosevic, that actually stopped the trend of impunity with Milosevic, with Saddam Hussein, and Charles Taylor. You now see an example where these heads of state, there's always an expectation that if they commit terrible crimes, that they should be tried. And so the Charles Taylor case is another example of that. The fact that it's been moved, that his actual trial has been moved from Africa up to The Hague, actually shows the amazing linkages between the different organs and these different international bodies, but they're all working for the same end, which is help bring justice to those people who wouldn't be able to find it. With respect to your question on kind of the U.S. government and its role in such cases, I mean, the U.S. government, from my impression from working within the administration and also from my time as a U.S. military officer, I can say that there's an incredible focus on the importance of international law. You can see it in our Constitution. You can see it by the way we go forward in terms of implementing the treaties we sign up to. And the fact that this trial has been moving forward at the ICC, even though the U.S. is reluctant on certain aspects of how the ICC is set up, shows its dedication to the importance of this particular case. And also you can see it with respect to the case referral on the Darfur case to the ICC, how the United States chose not to object to that, even though it has concerns with the way the ICC has been formed.
So I guess what you're saying is that there's been a softening of the position. I mean, when President Bush came to office in 2000, one of his first interactions on the international stage in regards to international justice was sort of famously unsigning the previous administration's name to the Rome Statute. This is something that the United States Undersecretary of State for International Security, John Bolton, sort of took great pleasure in doing, was unsigning the U.S.'s name to the Rome Statute. And sort of since then, in the first Bush term, there seems to have been a trajectory of increasing hostility towards the ICC. So it seems that they were sort of hell-bent on carving out these sort of greater and greater areas of immunity for Americans by forcing countries that were allied with the United States into signing what are called bilateral immunity agreements, and which would prevent an American sort of found to have committed a war crime on that country's soil, from being extradited to the International Criminal Court. And what the U.S. did was they would withhold military aid or economic aid to these countries should they not should they not sign these bilateral immunity agreements. And I remember I was doing some reporting when I was with the American Prospect back in 2005 about sort of these bilateral immunity agreements, and I remember calling up someone from the Latvian embassy, because I know that Latvia had refused to sign one of these agreements, yet Latvia was sort of a member of the Coalition of the Willing at the time. They had, I think, 45 soldiers in Iraq at the time, and sort of there seemed to be this sort of ridiculous situation in which sort of the 45 Latvian soldiers were prevented from receiving American military aid for a period of a few months because the country refused to sign this immunity agreement. I mean, that was eventually resolved, but it sort of seems to me to highlight the absurdity, at least at that point, of this sort of hostile, this really aggressively hostile opposition to the court. And respond. Yes, that's my little monologue. Excuse me. Pardon me. Yes.
Not at all, Mark. I think with respect to the kind of U.S. Position of the ICC, one of the things I learned in my brief stint in the U.S. government is the fact that it's really hard to say that the government has a position on something like this. There are a lot of different people in the government, and depending on which agency or which department you go to and talk to different officials, people have very different impressions in terms of what the U.S. relationship should be to the ICC. The U.S. government, as you know, is a major proponent of setting up an international tribunal such as the ICC, and its concerns are basically on the fact that the ICC has claims jurisdiction over parties that haven't actually signed up to the ICC. And so some concerns based on that. And from my time in government, I can say that the concerns of an approach like that is probably somewhat linked to the fact that the U.S. was voted off the Human Rights Commission, a body that it basically helped create. Mrs. Roosevelt was the one that really tried to push that through. And rather than the U.S. serving on that commission, countries like Libya, which was implicated in the Pan Am 103 bombing, and Sudan, which not at the time wasn't perpetrating genocide, as many are talking about now in Darfur, but merely was committing terrible crimes such as slavery and others. And they were actually voted onto the commission in place of the United States. And I think there are probably many people in the U.S. government that wondered if there was an opportunity to go after the United States because of its unpopularity in the world, that when an ICC prosecutor might take that opportunity to do so.
Do you see those concerns as being legitimate? I mean, do you foresee a scenario in which sort of an American might face ICC prosecution?
I think that there's always that distant chance, and I think that depending on the administration, some people will decide to take a more conservative view or a more liberal view. I think it's interesting to see what will happen in the next administration if that position will change. But you have to recognize it's not just the president and the executive branch that's going to make this determination. It's also going to be up to the United States Senate to whether they're going to ratify that. And I think that's an open question. We're still debating whether the U.S. Senate's going to ratify the Law of the Sea Convention. And it's been waiting in the works for quite some time, and it's still an open question in that regard.
I guess there are ways, though, currently sort of the United States is barred by law from cooperating with the International Criminal Court. There's the American Service Members Protection Act, which was a piece of legislation pushed by Jesse Helms right before he retired in 2002 that sort of forbade American support for the ICC, but absent the presidential waiver. So the current president is understandably unwilling to sign these waivers generally, although you're saying, and I think you're right, that the position has been softening as the administration has sort of evolved over time.
And just on that point, really quick, I would note that, as you know, John Bellinger, the legal advisor at the State Department, and a very capable lawyer, was recently in The Hague giving a speech on kind of U.S. commitment to international law, and noted the fact that the U.S. government, in particular the State Department, because they're the ones that take these requests, would be willing to work with the ICC on the Darfur case, which, as you point out, it shows an increased willingness to work with the organization that the U.S. government, the current administration, has strong reservations on how it's actually structured.
I guess, getting back to this point about sort of whether Americans will ever be tried before the ICC, I mean, at least to me it seems that while it might technically be possible, politically I think it will never happen. If you look at sort of right now, the ICC there are 4 cases before the ICC. All of them.
Really quick on that note, the fact it could never happen, I'd be reluctant to say it would never happen. Anything could happen. The fact of the matter is when NATO forces bombed in Belgrade, I think there are many people that would be shocked to think that NATO might be investigated by the Yugoslav tribunal for possible war crimes. And I think pundits would say, that would never happen. But the fact of the matter is the prosecutor at the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal actually did look into the case and see if there might be some validity to that case. And I think, go ahead.
I was saying that, the prosecutor looked into it but dismissed it. Similarly, the prosecutor of the ICC was deluged by suggestions that he prosecute Americans for crimes in Iraq, and all these a bunch of NGO groups and citizens wrote into him and asked him to do that, and he held a press conference saying, I considered it and it's not going to happen, and he gave the reason, namely that the United States is not a member of the ICC, and neither was Iraq at the time. But beyond that, I think it's simply it's politically very, very unlikely. I think for the principally 2 reasons. One, that the first time that the International Criminal Court prosecutes an American will be the last time it ever prosecutes anyone. I think its funders in Europe will likely dry up. I think the American opposition will be completely overwhelming, and it just wouldn't happen. Secondly, if you look at the way in which the court is structured, it really only prosecutes cases where countries, jurisdictions are unable or unwilling to prosecute themselves. I was saying before, if you look at sort of their current set of cases before the ICC right now, I think is very revealing in that regard. All of them are in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's the case in the Congo, there's a situation in northern Uganda, there's Darfur, and there's the Central African Republic. In the case of Darfur was requested by the Security Council. In the other cases, the governments themselves said, we can't deal with this, we need help. And to me, it seems, I think it's revealing that the ICC is only ever working in Africa, and I think, frankly, it will only ever prosecute cases in Africa because these are the countries without the sort of domestic capacity to try the cases themselves.
We'll see how things progress. I think the chief prosecutor, Mr. Ocampo, is a very dedicated prosecutor. He's a tremendous track record. And when I had the opportunity to meet and talk with him when I was in The Hague, working in The Hague, and he was just starting off his duties as chief prosecutor there, he indicated a strong desire to be very focused on the cases that he picks up. The eyes of the world, as you know, because people like you are watching at all times and bringing it through such medias as these online chats, are on him and everything he's doing there. So he's going to make sure he does an outstanding job, and I'm sure he's going to do his best in that respect. With respect to kind of U.S. involvement with the ICC, it's been my experience working at the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal that I think any international institution, is a better one with the U.S. government's involvement. The amount of work that was able to be accomplished by the Yugoslav Tribunal, frankly, directly due to U.S. support, was incredibly just outstanding. The vast majority of the indictees, the war criminals that were indicted while I was there, in the cases I was working on, were picked up through the support of the U.S. government and our special forces down there in the region, also particularly with the Brits, who did an outstanding job. The number of search warrants that were enabled to be executed because of U.S. military support. Frankly, when you're working at the UN, there's not much that protects you aside from your blue helmet if you're wearing one. I never did. But when you're walking to try to do a search warrant, there's sometimes situations where people there don't want you to take the documents they have. And the only thing that allows UN prosecutors and investigators to go knocking on doors with a piece of paper signed by some judge in The Hague saying that they have the right to look at these documents is the fact that standing with those UN officials are U.S. Bodyguards to make sure nothing happens, usually a Black Hawk helicopter flying overhead to make sure nothing's going to happen, and U.S. troops all over in the area to make sure nothing's going to happen. And that really helps the execution of international law when trying to obtain documents and search warrants or pick up indictees for the International Tribunal. And I can see that if the U.S. government were working with the ICC or with other institutions as it has in the past, that those institutions would only be better. So, and my hope is as time progresses, there'll be some sort of additional agreements between the United States governments and the state parties of the Rome Statute to help sponsor that interaction.
I guess, that's maybe, I think you probably touched on where my frustration is in all this. I see sort of the potential, like you described, for the court to be more robust and to really be able to flex its muscles, not only to prosecute war criminals, but to, I guess its ultimate goal is to deter future, heads of state from thinking that a good political strategy might be genocide. And to that end, I think the court's deterrent power only increases when you have support from such a powerful country like the United States. Now, I just say because Bob Wright, the overlord of this forum, the blogging head, sort of asked me to ask you. Why can't the ICC just indict Henry Kissinger or George Bush? Should they really want to stick it a needle into the eye of the Americans? Do you have a good answer for that? I have one.
I'd love to hear your answer. I mean, but for a lot of these things, it's the basic jurisdictional issues. So you're just not going to have the jurisdiction based on the statute itself. I mean, one of the things that I was a little distressed by when Saddam Hussein was picked up, and many people were calling for him to be arrested and sent to the International Criminal Court in The Hague to be tried, which just simply is just not practical, and the fact that the jurisdiction just didn't allow it. So you've got to look at that first, and I think many people who are lawyers look to kind of the basic nuts and bolts of, can you actually do this? It's not even worth talking about if you don't have the basic structure for it.
Yeah. I guess for what it's worth, I think the statute of the International Criminal Court says that it can't try any cases before that for any crimes that occurred before, I think, July 1st, 2002.
Exactly.
Which I think means that Kissinger is in the clear unless he's out like robbing peasants in Connecticut right now. Right. Moving on, though, you mentioned, Rick, you worked. We said earlier that you had some capacity in the Iraqi Special Tribunal, and I'm wondering sort of if you can speak anything about sort of what you witnessed, I guess, in the execution of Saddam Hussein, which happened just about a year ago.
Sure.
Yeah, no, please. Yeah.
Yeah, my involvement in the Saddam case was I was one of a handful of people that was helping train the Iraqi judges on the background of kind of international law as it pertains to human rights, war crimes, and this type of issues. Unfortunately, Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General of the UN at the time, had declined to allow any currently serving UN official from helping out in that case, which I think, frankly, was just very, very unfortunate. You had a situation where Iraqis were really, sincerely dying in order to help bring justice in that area, and the fact that help was withheld, even by UN officials who are willing to go down on their own personal time to do it, was very, very unfortunate. And that's why
just to interrupt. The reason Kofi Annan gave at the time was because the Iraqi Special Tribunal sort of included the death penalty.
Right, and that is true, but you could also say that there's a death penalty in Rwanda, there's a death penalty in Afghanistan, as far as I know. There's still UN programs going on in those countries, and even if there's concern of a particular tribunal itself, in that case, my suggestion, which I wrote about in a couple op-eds, is the fact that the UN could help the Defense Council, help the court administration, help just translating the documents, the many volumes of kind of international law jurisprudence from Rwanda and Yugoslav tribunals that frankly just aren't printed in Arabic. Those are all things that could be done that would help the tribunal in its work. And from frankly my experience working with the judges for the short time I had with them, I was impressed by the fact the trial judges which are the ones I spent time with, came from all different backgrounds. They're all three major ethnic groups were represented in that group, and they were all truly dedicated to helping bring justice.
I think, and not only that, but I think brave as well. A lot of these people lost their lives in trying to serve justice in Iraq as well.
Absolutely. In fact, during the training session I participated in, one of the judges that didn't make it to the training session was gunned down with his 17-year-old son, which was a reminder to all the judges that they really were risking their lives and the lives of their families, and were still willing to step forward and help bring justice to that country. So I was very inspired by those. Frankly, in terms of the appeal and how that worked and the execution, I think that was very unfortunate. There's ample reasons to wait to let that proceed through a more stable manner. And I think that's a lesson learned for hopefully future tribunals. But frankly, the trial itself, the initial stage, I think went better than I think many people had expected.
Do you see a clear linkage between bringing these people to justice and stability in the country or reconciliation? On the one hand, it's you look at sort of the last decade of Bosnia, for example, and there's been slowly, not completely, but slowly, the wounds are healing in that society. If you look at Iraq, you also had a head of state brought to justice and now dead. And the situation is as dire as ever.
I think that international justice is one component of what brings stability. It's not the only thing that's going to make the difference. Obviously, there's many different components to that. There's, without giving away his name, because I'm not sure if you'd want me to share it, a comment made once by comparing the success of some tribunals in one country to the ones in Bosnia, or the war crimes committed in Bosnia, was the fact that in some countries, international justice or justice for the victims is part of a very complex system, and in other countries it's kind of the cherry on top, in the sense that it's all important, and one can't look to one particular aspect and think that's it for the country and it'll be successful purely because there's a trial. People need to do more than just that, and you can see that in past conflict areas. It's not just that some of the senior leaders are tried and convicted and stand trial. It's also maybe perhaps a mix between truth and reconciliation commissions, so people understand what's actually happening. Maybe lower level courts, as they've taken on in Rwanda, and there's many different approaches that are based on kind of that local population. And one thing I would add in that respect is, I think that many people in kind of the Western world, particularly the intellectual elite of these countries around the world, think that oftentimes might think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. In fact, there's not. One thing to remember is justice is, I think, most important for the victims of that country. And so I think there should be an interest in actually seeing what the populace of that country really wants, and that should be a focus of those trials. And that's. Go ahead.
Sorry, this is sort of a good segue, I think, into my next question. There seems to be this tension, at least, in sort of the debate over bringing international criminals to justice, whether you do it in The Hague or whether you do it in the country itself. And it was somewhat controversial that they decided to bring Charles Taylor from Sierra Leone to The Hague. He's pretty far removed from the victims of his crime. I'm wondering sort of if. And I guess similarly, not quite as far removed as having the Milosevic's trial in The Hague as opposed to somewhere in the region. Does that sort of physical distance sort of diminish the perception among sort of the victim populations that justice is not being sort of met out in their case?
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important concern, and I think in many of these cases there's a balancing act. Where is best. Yeah. The best location to have these trials, as you know from your time in The Hague, that in terms of the spectators in the courtroom, frankly, those people at the Yugoslav tribunal, the spectators weren't always the vast majority were not Bosniaks, it's not Serbs, we're not Croats that flew up on their own dime to go to The Hague to watch these trials. They're usually law students, tourists are passing through the Netherlands and want to check out the trial, and that does. Cause a distance between the action of justice actually taking place in the courtroom to those actual witnesses. And I could tell you from my time in Belgrade, and every Serb I talked to thought that Milosevic should have been tried in Serbia for crimes in Serbia, and were very disappointed that he was pulled out and sent to The Hague. So I think there's always going to be that tension, particularly when you have these grand resources in The Hague where trials can be held. and trying to figure out where cases should be sent there versus where they should be tried in the domestic jurisdiction where the crimes actually occurred.
Yeah. I guess what do courts like? What did the ICTY, the forum that tried Milosevic, what did they do to sort of advertise in Serbia and in the Balkans and in Bosnia?
I think the Yugoslav Tribunal, the ICTY you mentioned, had a outreach program in all the different countries that it was working in. The cases were broadcast down there. You can watch it online. I encourage those people who are interested in these cases to hop on the websites for these different tribunals, because there's usually a link, at least for the ICTY, where you actually log in and kind of watch the trial as it happens, which is incredibly fascinating, and it shows that technology has brought justice to people throughout the planet. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be in the country to actually see it happen. You can hop online and do so. But again, it shows the way that many of us in the Western world think. The fact that you just hop online and watch the case, for you and I, is just natural. You can do that in your living room. For the vast majority of the world's population, you don't have the opportunity to hop online to watch these things. So it's something that I think people should keep in mind.
So I guess this is another good segue. What you've worked on at the ICTY, the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal, and presumably this thing can't go on forever. The ICTY was created in the mid 1990s, and it's now 2008. How much longer? Presumably, though, there are more war criminals to be tried. I mean, right now the two biggest sort of ones are Mladic and Karadzic.
That's right.
And will the ICTY shut down without having ever sort of gotten their hands on those two?
Right. Right now, as you know, the Security Council and the international community, I think, is reluctant to let the tribunal go on indefinitely, and there is a plan to start to have a closure plan and an endgame strategy for that tribunal, and it's because there's vast sums of money and people working on there every single day, and the thought is perhaps that money could be refocused elsewhere. I'm a little biased, of course. I helped out on the Srebrenica case. I had the opportunity to go down to the Balkans and spend some time talking to the victims and seeing the mass graves and seeing the crimes that were committed there. And just my role as a very junior lawyer there, saw the importance of this tribunal and how it helps bring justice to the victims. For the witnesses that I helped out with, when they came up to The Hague and they testified against, say, Milosevic or some general involved in these crimes, you could see them become more and more empowered and become stronger as they sat on the stand testifying against these terrible individuals that perpetrated these crimes. And they brought those stories back to their villages, their hamlets, their cities in the Balkans. And I think it helped bring more the sense of justice and that justice was done. I think that the fact that these tribunals, so that the Yugoslav tribunal could shut down before the prosecution of Mladic or Karadzic would be unfortunate, and I hope that there is this focused plan in terms of what to do when they are arrested. I believe, I'm still the optimist. I think most people in this type of business who have worked in these areas still remain optimists, because the reason why they opt to do this work, usually in different parts of the world, away from their friends and families. They do it particularly for the Americans and the Brits, for a huge cut in pay compared to what they can make in the private sector. And there's a true belief that the work that they're doing is for the public good. And I'm hopeful that when these individuals are arrested, and I think the justice tends to follow these individuals, and we will not soon forget, even though many people may not have it in the front of their minds, that they will be brought to justice.
I guess there is a chance, though. Unfortunate as it might be, that the tribunal runs out of money or shuts down before Mladic and Karadzic are brought to justice, and of course Milosevic never sort of lived to hear his judgment. I'm wondering, sort of overall, then, how do you measure success in a tribunal like this?
Sure, I think, and particularly in the Milosevic case, having helped out in that case. It was very unfortunate that he died a couple months before the end of the trial. Mm-hmm. But one thing to remember, and I guess I'll kind of finish off in one of the earlier thoughts I put forth, is that the fact that the sense of international justice has truly changed. I mean, when Milosevic was arrested, frankly, before he was arrested, I didn't think it was actually going to happen. I figured he'd figure out a way to skip town in Serbia and live in Russia or some other third country. And the fact that he was arrested and brought to The Hague, he was the most powerful man in the Balkans, the butcher of the Balkans, that brought so much destruction to that country, rather than living in some beautiful villa, spend his last days in a prison cell yearning to be free. He was hoping to go to Russia to get to be with his wife, and that never worked out for him. And so the fact that some small sense of justice has occurred, I think that will continue to occur with future dictators that commit terrible crimes.
I mean, I guess that also speaks to the practical political effects of these trials, which is sort of to remove these criminals from their bully pulpits. Before Milosevic was arrested, he was sort of deposed as president, but he was still sowing instability in the region until he landed in the dock in The Hague, where his ability to steer events back in the Balkans were severely diminished. Similarly with Charles Taylor, he was hiding out in a bungalow in Nigeria for a while before he was captured and extradited to The Hague. But while he was there, he still could telephone in his allies in Monrovia and in Liberia, and continued to be an agent of instability until he was removed, like physically removed from the area in which he was been such a malignant actor. I guess you're out of time now, Mark. I'm sorry to say, but this was fascinating. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We look forward to following your career even more. It's been fascinating so far, and let's talk.
And yours as well, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Take care.
You too.
Bye.